Hi, Scott Orlin with Cinema Magazine. I am here with Academy Award winning director and writer Damien Chazelle, this time not for a film, but for a new TV series he's associated with called The Eddy. You know, Damien, obviously, in a lot of your work, there have been little nuances of jazz that have kind of permeated through, but now you have dived into the deep end with this. Talk about the language of jazz and why it makes for an interesting subject matter.
Well, I think for me, it started, very much on a personal front where it's just the music I used to play and used to sort of live and breathe every day. And so as a world that I felt I knew something about, it was kind of this obvious sort of terrain to try to dive into with films early on. But I think it was the sort of thing where, every time I would make a film involving jazz in any way, there was more I wanted to unpack. There was always more left on the table, I felt. So here, I think that it was definitely an opportunity, as you say, to really dive in a more sort of into the deep end kind of way, to cast a lot of real great jazz musicians who, even if they hadn't acted before, to film music live so that we could really, it was sort of my ideal, an ideal I've been trying to kind of aspire to for a while, of really trying to combine documentary and fiction and approach this like a documentary film about jazz musicians, but then of course interweave this very fictional storyline with great actors as well.
When a lot of people think of jazz, they think of New Orleans, but it really, for Europe, it was Paris. That was kind of the epicenter for where a lot of jazz musicians went and a lot of jazz kind of flourished. Talk about setting your locale there. What benefit did it afford you?
Well, I think Paris is, to me, actually, the benefit was what in some ways would have appeared to be the challenge, in that there's such a preconception about Paris and jazz. When you mention those two things put together, and we had this experience all the time when we were pitching the show or trying to set it up, the immediate response is, oh, okay, so it's set in the 50s or set in the 40s or set in the 20s or the 60s, just, sometime in the past. So the idea of, no, this is jazz in Paris and it's set today and it's going to be about today, that was what was kind of driving all of us making the show. That was kind of the point of making it, was to try to see how some of those cliches and romantic ideals that we've got from the past update or don't update to the present. And obviously Paris is a city going through, feels like, great changes every day the last few years. And jazz itself is a music that is far more international than it used to be. As you say, certainly Paris was kind of this bastion in Europe of jazz early on, but now jazz is everywhere. So what does that mean for this kind of capital of culture like Paris, and also now the sort of melting pot, sometimes uneasy melting pot like Paris? Just those kind of questions were, I think, fascinating to us.
And, some people could say, oh, this is kind of a musical interlude story about jazz. It's really not. It's about family. It's about relationships. It's got some intrigue in there too. Talk a little bit about your central character, this guy who owns the club, because then all of a sudden when you infuse his daughter into the mix, all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, so a lot of the credit to just the story itself and the narrative structure of the whole thing has to go to Jack Thorne, who's the writer who we brought on. All we had when he came on was basically Jazz Club in Paris. And we had songs that Glenn Ballard had written, these beautiful songs. And so actually, in some ways, it's not that dissimilar from how I've worked in the past with my composer, with Justin Hurwitz. The music came first, and Jack had to kind of find the story within the songs, songs that had been written in a little more of a vacuum. And so the idea quickly kind of presented itself of this main character who would be our opening sort of entree into the world, someone who used to play but doesn't play anymore, and now kind of likes to hide behind the club and the band a little bit. But like everyone else, and what the show wanted to try to sort of expand on, he needs this club, he needs this music, he needs this band. Even if he plays a little cold and aloof and sort of at arm's length sometimes with them, it's something he desperately needs. And of course, part of the development of the story is us finding out why he needs this and why he feels compelled against all odds sometimes to keep this club alive, to keep the band going, even when it seems like the world is telling him not to. That became a little bit the sort of driving narrative engine of the show.
Well, if I ever go to Paris again, please God, in this thing, I want to go to that club.
I love it. We'll open it just for you.
Thank you, sir. As always, Damien, thank you so much.
Thank you.
The show is called The Eddy, and this is Scott Orlin. Till next time.
Thanks, Scott.
You're welcome.